Niccolo Machiavelli begins The Prince with a letter to Lorenzo de' Medici, which reads as follows. People trying to attract the goodwill of a sovereign usually offer him something they care a lot about themselves, or something they've seen he particularly likes. So rulers are always being given horses, arms, gold, brocades, jewels, and whatever finery seems appropriate. Eager myself to bring your highness some token of my loyalty, I realized there was nothing more precious or important to me than my knowledge of great men and their doings, a knowledge gained through long experience of contemporary affairs and a constant study of ancient history. Having thought over all I've learned and analyzed it with the utmost care, I've written everything down in a short book that I am now sending to your highness. And though this gift is no doubt unworthy of you, I feel sure the experience it contains will make it welcome, especially when you think that I could hardly offer anything better than the chance to grasp in a few hours what I have discovered and assimilated over many years of danger and discomfort. I haven't prettified the book or padded it out with long sentences or pompous, pretentious words or any of the irrelevant flourishes and attractions so many writers use. I didn't want to please for anything but the range and seriousness of its subject matter. Nor, I hope, will you think it presumptuous that a man of really the lowest station should set out to discuss the way princes ought to govern their peoples. Just as artists who draw landscapes get down in the valley to study the mountains and go up to the mountains to look down on the valley, so one has to be a prince to get to know the character of a people and a man of the people to know the character of a prince. Your Highness, please take this small gift in the spirit in which it is given. Study it carefully, and you will find that my most earnest wish is that you should achieve the greatness that your status and qualities promise. Then if, from the high peak of your position, you ever look down on those far below, you will see how very ungenerously and unfairly life continues to treat me. So wrote Machiavelli. The first 3 chapters of The Prince are concerned with describing the different kinds of states that exist, how to conquer them, and govern them. In Chapter 1, Machiavelli says that all states or governments have been either republics or monarchies, and that monarchies can either be hereditary and the domain of ancient lineage or otherwise newly formed, or they could be territories added to already pre-existing realms, as when the King of Spain seized Naples. Machiavelli adds that, quote, an additional territory won by conquest will be accustomed either to living under a monarch or to the freedom of self-government, and may be conquered by the new ruler's own army or that of a third party, by luck or deservedly, end quote. Immediately following this begins Chapter 2 on hereditary monarchs. Machiavelli states that hereditary monarchies, where people have long been beholden to a single family, are a lot easier to hold than newer monarchies. Fundamentally, all a monarch need do to avoid upsetting the order established by his predecessors is trim policies to circumstances when trouble arises, and supposing there's no massive foreign invasion and the monarch is of average ability, he should be able to hold onto his throne for life. The prescription by Machiavelli here is essentially one of conservatism, that the best way to hold onto power within a monarchical structure is to not innovate and be progressive, but rather hold onto that which has been given and act with benevolence as one might, and dial back superfluous or non-essential edicts as the need arises and where possible. Furthermore, should an adequate hereditary monarch lose his kingdom to foreign forces, and not due to any internal uprisings of the people or coup by nobles, there's a decent chance that he shall regain the throne soon, as the occupying powers run into trouble. As an example of this, Machiavelli gives the Duchy of Ferrara, which had been conquered by both Venice and the papacy, and both times reverted back to the original, well-established ruling family who had nothing to do with Ferrara's defeat. Machiavelli states, quote, a ruler who inherits power has less reason or need to upset his subjects than a new one, and as a result is better loved. If he doesn't go out of his way to get himself hated, it's reasonable to suppose his people will wish him well. When a dynasty survives for generations, memories fade, and likewise motives for change. Upheaval, on the contrary, always leaves the scaffolding for building further change. End quote. For Chapter 3, Machiavelli pivots to a discussion of mixed monarchies, which is much lengthier than the first two chapters. Machiavelli defines mixed monarchies as new territory added to an already existing territory. The inevitable problem of any new regime, according to Machiavelli, is that the men are quick to change rulers when they believe that this will improve their lot. However, they usually very often discover that they were wrong, that their situation was not improved after throwing off the old regime, and they were better off under the old dispensation. A conquering ruler is bound to upset his new subjects, first by occupying their lands with a foreign army, and then with the endless injustices consequent of any invasion. Not only does a conqueror make enemies with those he directly dispossesses, but it's also very difficult to maintain friendship with those who helped the ruler gain power, since he's unable to grant them what they'd imagined. Neither can the conqueror be too harsh with them either, since he relies on their support. No matter how strong the army, territory cannot be held with at least some degree of local support. This is why King Louis XII lost Milan as quickly as he gained it. The people who had opened the gates for Louis in hopes of greater gain were unwilling to submit to the harsher conditions imposed by the new king. These very same people opened the gates to the returning Duke Ludovico of Milan, who was able to retake the city with his own forces with next to no trouble. After being ousted once, a returning king is less likely to lose his throne a second time, partially because he'll have less scruples when dealing with those who would undermine his authority. This is seen in Machiavelli's own experience, when the returning Medici family dissolved the government of Florence and persecuted those who they thought may have had a hand in their initial overthrow. Machiavelli also points out that it is much easier to hold onto a territory if the conquering lord and army share a common tongue with the annexed territory. It is also easier as well if the conquered people are unused to self-government. Should these criteria be met, all that needs happen is for the conqueror to execute the erstwhile ruling family, for the new ruler to be relatively comfortable in his power. If he is wise enough to leave things as they were, provided local customs aren't too different, the people will generally accept the status quo soon enough. The new boss is essentially the same as the old boss, and maybe even a little bit better. As examples of this, Machiavelli gives the regions of Burgundy, Brittany, Gascony, and Normandy. All these regions had on a time been their own kingdoms, with even some differences in language. However, they had all been absorbed by the Kingdom of France, and had become integrated none too difficultly, for these lands were peopled by those who weren't altogether alien to the new French order. Things become difficult, however, when a ruler occupies a region or state with different languages, customs, and institutions. Diversity is absolutely not a strength for statecraft. To control a newly conquered land with an alien populace takes a lot of luck and hard work, and even then, with the best laid plans, it can still fail. Perhaps the best thing a conquering ruler can do in this situation, according to Machiavelli, is go there and live himself. This improves stability and helps the ruler to avoid being lied to about the situation by his proxies. To quote Machiavelli, "When you're actually there, you can see when things start going wrong and nip the rebellion in the bud. When you're far away, you only find out about it when it's too late." End quote. This also limits the likelihood of the new territory being plundered by the ruler's officials and ginning up local resentment. People disadvantaged by the previous regime make natural allies in such a situation, but precautions must be taken to keep them from gaining too much power or authority. From a position of strength, the new sovereign of a foreign land must manage relations with new neighbors as well, otherwise he'll lose his territory, especially if his neighbors are of significant strength in their own right. As a successful model of this, Machiavelli highlights the Roman Empire, who would conduct themselves in the following ways when adding a new province. The Romans would send colonists, establish friendly relations with weaker neighbors without having them increase their own power, subvert and undermine strong neighbors, and not allow them a strong influence in the newly acquired territory. A case example of this given by Machiavelli is the Romans in Greece. The Romans established good relations with the Achaeans and Aetolians, undermined Macedonian power, and drove out Antiochus. They didn't reward the good behavior of the Achaeans or Aetolians with new lands, and whenever Philip of Macedon convinced them to establish friendly relations with him, Rome made sure he was weakened as a result. Despite Antiochus's strength, he was never allowed any significant influence in the region, as when he was denied the right to attack Alexandria by a Roman ambassador outside the city. Machiavelli's advice in dealing with a political problem is to try and see it coming and sort it out in advance. Machiavelli wasn't a fan of standing by and waiting for situations to play themselves out. He states that great men in history, quote, never took the line our pundits constantly are giving us today. Relax, time is on your side. But rather, they put their faith in their own foresight and spirit. Time hurries everything on and can just as easily make things worse as better, end quote. This isn't to say that action for its own sake is either prudent nor wise, especially when it comes to foreign adventures or engaging in intrigues with great powers. Due to the ambitions of the Venetians to make territorial gains in Lombardy, they invited in the French to share the territory with them. Once the French had arrived, the Venetians were in a situation they could no longer control. Through pursuing their own greedy aims, they had brought in a powerful and dangerous outside force in direct contact with themselves. For 2 towns in Lombardy, the Venetians had made Louis king over a third of Italy. This left the French king in an extremely powerful position to potentially rule over Italy itself, but this was squandered for 5 main reasons, according to Machiavelli. First, he eliminated the weaker states instead of using them to further his own objectives. He enhanced the power of Italy's stronger states. He brought in the very powerful King of Spain to split Naples with, who would later act as a counter-influence to his own strength. Louis didn't live in the territory he'd conquered, nor did he send colonists to people the land. For all of his mistakes, Louis would lose control of Lombardy, and the Venetians, who initially invited the French in, had created a situation now completely out of their control. This has been Mr. Patriarch. If you've enjoyed this video, the best thing you can do to help me out is subscribe if you haven't already, like, comment, and share with somebody who you think will benefit from this material. I look forward to seeing you again soon when we'll continue our analysis of the Prince. Patriarch, out.